never having to convince people, wow, you really need a great brand, a great website. So job security is like on point. It's just fine. But genuinely, I'm like, no, don't do this right now. You need to live in your brand. You need to occupy your brand first. Because I like to say a designer can't give you a brand. They can only give your brand something to wear.
Welcome to the Brands That Book Show, where we help creative businesses build their brands and find more clients. I'm your host, Davey Jones, and today's interview is with Jen Olmstead, a Virginia-based graphic designer and visual storyteller who has worked with some of the biggest names in the creative industry. And today she's sharing how you can create a unique and authentic brand even without hiring a designer. So, first getting started, life looks a lot different for you now, right? Having a second child. Yeah, right, and working from home, right? And you work from home primarily.
I do.
Yeah. So how has that been? How's that transition been, going from having one to two?
I mean, I feel like I got knocked off a little pedestal because I feel like I was just like, hey, you know what? I don't know why people talk about like this is so hard to be like a mom and a creative and entrepreneur. Like, we're doing great. And I think I unfairly remembered like when my daughter Serena was born 3 years ago. I was like, this is great. I launched a website like the week after she was born. I had guests in to work on their brands, and she would like sleep for a few hours and I would work for a few hours, and then we would like sip espresso together. And I feel like I got so much done. And so I thought that that's kind of what would happen this time around with my daughter Sophia, who's now 6 months old. And so I didn't really take time off with Sophia, and I still had like a full slate of work because I was remembering like this imaginary productive Jennifer that had lived 3 years ago. And this time I was like, how did I not account for the fact that like when I have a baby sleeping, I have a 3-year-old who needs lunch or a snack or like the next episode of something or like wants to color. And so it was definitely a much bigger adjustment than I thought it would be. And so I've really had to get into a new rhythm of like, okay, I can't really plan to have like 4 hours of work time at any time unless I'm going to stay up until like 2 a.m. or unless I have help that day. So it was a really humbling adjustment of like, okay, this is a totally new season and I have to account for that. And I've been grateful to have clients in a business like with my business Tonic, that's more of a residual income that can operate without my like direct involvement at every moment, because I certainly haven't been able to be involved at every moment. So I feel like the light at the end of the tunnel is here, but it was definitely a bigger adjustment than I expected.
Yeah, well, I know Chris and I are going to be looking to you for advice. As we get closer to June and figuring that out for ourselves. But that's awesome. And I want to go back and really talk about how you first got started.
Sure.
So you went to Patrick Henry College and you majored in journalism.
Yes.
And so how did a degree in journalism lead to design?
Well, I'm very much the quintessential accidental entrepreneur story. I mean, very much so. I went to college for journalism. I was super excited about writing long form journalism and working for the New Yorker or like McSweeney's or the Onion or something of that nature. And I knew at that point, and it's still true now, that mostly I just loved stories and I found people really fascinating and I loved talking with them and figuring out what made them tick. And so that was really representative in my writing at that point. It's like, okay, like how can we take this person and really articulate who they are and what they think and write something that appeals to them.
I do think that you would be great at the Onion. I mean, you would have been great at all of those places, but I think you would have been that would have been a great fit.
I was really excited about that. I was like, oh, maybe I can be in broadcast and I'll like be Diane Sawyer that's like, and they're like making people cry or like making them laugh, just like, I was very excited about this. And then I realized that I wasn't hot enough to be on daytime and I probably would just end up as a weather girl for like, 10 years until I got wrinkles and was like, okay, this is not a good trajectory for me. So anyway, so that's what I was pursuing in college. And then I think it was kind of telling whenever I was the editor of the school paper and my first editorial decision was like, should we change the body font to Minion Pro? It wasn't like anything story related, nothing like about actual journalism. And so I think that was the first hint whenever I fell in love with editorial design and layout and was like up late researching other newspapers and magazines and kind of like sifting through those ideas. And so I think I began to realize like if the story doesn't look good, if it's not visually appealing, then people don't want to read it. Because all of a sudden, when we redesigned even our school newspaper, everyone was like, oh, did you know we had a school newspaper? Like, this is not that. So it was really telling. And so the college actually started hiring me to do some design projects for them, some marketing and like branding projects, which was dumb since I was like a college sophomore. I'm like, that was a terrible idea, college. I don't know what you're doing. But then some friends were like, hey, I'm getting married. Can you design a wedding invitation? And then sooner or later, since I was in college, a bunch of my friends had started photography businesses around that time, as like that kind of was booming. And we're like, hey, Jen, I would love to have your help designing my website. And I was like, no, that's not what I do. I don't do coding. Like, I don't have any experience in this whatsoever. And again, they were like, I don't care if you have experience. Like, let's just try it. And so they introduced me to the platform that you now love too, that I remember selling Krista on a few years ago, Show It. And so I fell in love with Show It because the team was super awesome. And then obviously it's a platform where you don't have to do any like coding or back end work. It's all developed visually. So that was like a new, like exciting place for me to land. And so I did my first website for a friend. And then one of her friends was like, hey, I saw your website. Who did that? Can they help me? And then things just began to snowball from there because, as you know, the creative world is just so very large and small at the same time. And the great thing about what we do is you never have to tell someone, man, you really need a new website. They're like constantly in this like vacuum of like, oh my gosh, I totally need a new website. My website sucks so much. Please help. So
I feel like everybody goes through that each year almost, where they feel like, hey, my website needs an update. And it's so true. The creative industry, I feel like, is so big and you're always discovering different corners of it. But at the same time, somehow so small as well.
I know.
But that's such a fascinating story because that's kind of how Krista got involved in design as well. But it was in high school. Yeah, she was working for her high school paper and realized that she didn't care so much about the writing part as she did about the layout of the paper. And so she was going to go originally to school for journalism. And right before she got there, decided to change her major to design. And so that's how she got started in design, worked in a wedding invitation studio. And then,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So it's very parallel lives that I did not know about until right now.
Yeah. And it's so interesting now talking to a number of entrepreneurs, how they kind of stumble into that world. Totally. Because I don't really think that there is a ton of preparation. Even if you were to major in business in school, there's not really a ton of preparation for for running your own business, being an entrepreneur, being part of a small team, so. Yeah.
I think that's going to change. I think increasingly there's going to be like as kind of our like society is focused more on entrepreneurship and that's been highlighted. I think that there are going to be a lot more streams of like even higher education that are oriented towards entrepreneurship. And I think I'm excited about that because I think that'll be a super beneficial thing. Because when I started out, I knew nothing about running a business. I still know very little honestly about running a business.
You and your husband run your own businesses.
Yes. And without my husband, I would not have a business license. He's like, you should be an S Corp. And I'm like, that sounds cool. That's a lot of letters. Great. So I've definitely benefited because he started his business in college to pay for college. And so he and his brother like paid for their school by working full time and starting a business in college. And he still runs that business now. So I've really benefited from his entrepreneurial streak too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so nice to have somebody, because Krista for a long time, she ran her own business and I was a high school teacher. And I know that for her, having somebody else to be in it with her was huge, just from a support standpoint. But I hope that you're right and that education does start, going that route where there's more, just real world in general. So your first clients, they were photographers?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I know it's interesting because everyone says like in the creative world, like you've got to find your niche. And I feel like my niche kind of found me because thankfully every photographer knows approximately 1,000 other photographers, it seems. And so when I did the first website for that photographer, she ended up being kind of a sandwich board for my business because all of a sudden she had a new website and all of her friends and their friends saw it. And so I think that was a really beneficial thing for me to realize, like, as soon as you're in a pool, that pool is your client base.
Yeah.
And so that was a really helpful thing starting out, is I never was like, I'm a web designer for creatives and branding specialist for creatives and small businesses and photographers. That kind of became my title by the fact that I was working with this specific group of people. And because of that, I got to know that specific industry well and kind of what their clients were looking for and what that field looked like. And so I think that was really beneficial early on.
So early on, while you're taking those clients, did you know, like, so you built that first photography business? Did you like working with the photographer?
I did.
And then, so you kind of knew after maybe building a couple of photography websites in particular that you're like, hey, this is, I'm good at this.
Well, it was really interesting because I look back, it's really interesting because I feel like very quickly into the process, I was like, this is what I'm good at. Like, this is where kind of all the things I care about merge. Because I remember one of the first conversations with one of my clients, Sarah Bradshaw, who was my second client ever. We just launched the new version of her site, so many years later. So she's still a client of mine. And I remember sitting down with her in Panera, and I was like, okay, so like, what do you want your site to look like? Who's your client? Like, what are the things, like, and I began to ask her questions kind of as a journalist. And she really responded to that. And I feel like in the course of that conversation, she's like, man, I'm so excited because I feel like you really get what I'm trying to do. And I was like, yeah, no, I do. I feel like I get it. I feel like I know what kind of the story I'm trying to tell is. And then that made me really be equipped to visually translate that to, okay, like, this is the story now, like, what do the visuals look like? And so I think at the time, now that's a super popular concept, but I don't think that was typical in the design community that I was in, at least at that point. I don't think that was how most people approached it. And so I think that made the results be somewhat different. And I loved then, like, after I had that story in place, the visuals were already there. And that's the benefit of working for photographers, as you know, is that they already have great visuals. Whereas most small businesses are like, crap, I need to have photos for this. Like,
it's old iPhone photos or,
Exactly.
Something like that.
I just got photos for a project the other day that I was doing actually for my college. And I was like, how is this photo 12 kilobytes? Like, where did you get this photo? Like, there aren't photos under 12 kilobytes. Is this from like a smartphone from 25 years ago?
The very first digital camera.
Yeah. They have like their Razor phone that they're taking photos with somewhere in like a dark room somewhere. I don't know.
And so that's awesome. You're still doing some work for your college.
Yeah, it's actually funny because they currently don't have a graphic designer on staff. And so they've joked that I am their staff graphic designer. But I keep telling them, I'm like, no, I have 2 other full-time jobs. Like, I am not your staff graphic designer.
You should say, yeah, that's fine as long as my kids get full rides to the school.
I joked about like negotiating something like that. So that may be on my cards at some point soon here.
Yeah, I think that's genius. So as you got started and you got your first client and that, client led to others, did you ever get to a place where you're like, okay, now like this is what I want to do. Now I need to go and find clients. Were there any challenges there in building your client base, or did clients kind of find you?
This is a terrible question because I'm going to say no, that I didn't ever go out and find clients. In fact, I had the opposite problem. I call it like the oh crap moment of entrepreneurship, where all of a sudden demand was far exceeding what I could execute. And so that was a huge struggle, still is a struggle for me, honestly, is because those first few websites people responded to really well. All of a sudden I had this huge influx of inquiries and people that were like, hey, man, I love this website. Please build mine. Can you do it next week? And I was like, no, I can't do that. So I'm so sorry. No, I can't. And because of how kind of in-depth my process was with each client, it was pretty time consuming for each project. And so all of a sudden I was facing being like overcommitted, working on too many things at one time, having this process that was like extending too far out because, I had a client and then another client and I was working on too many projects at the same time. And so that was honestly something that I really had to just overhaul my process, take fewer clients, and realize that like every single time I launched a website, there was going to be an influx of new inquiries of people saying like, hey, please, can you do this? And I think that's the benefit of like figuring out kind of like what your process looks like in achieving an outcome that you're proud of and working with clients that you love is because each project is basically like your biggest marketing set piece at that point. And so I think that it was kind of the opposite problem where I wasn't having to find clients. I was having to figure out how to like treat my existing clients well, and then how to say no or figure out something else. And so that's actually why I started the Tonic site shop that I have with my partner, Jeff Shipley. That's why I started that with him, because we saw this huge demand and this huge need, and all these creatives were like, oh my gosh, my website sucks. I love this website that you built. Can you do it? And I was just saying no over and over and over. And they're like, well, crap, like, thanks. And so anyway, we decided, okay, like there's obviously this huge need. We should design a set of templates for people who hate templates, who don't want a template website. Basically, that was kind of our audience. We said it was templates for people who give a damn, with apologies to my mother who's listening to this. But we set out to kind of create things that were just as good and like just as intentional and just as well researched and just as well designed as any of our custom projects that anyone would be proud to have, who would say like, oh man, it's like you designed this just for me. So that's kind of how Tonic was born, out of that like feeling terrible for just saying no, I can't help you over and over.
Yeah, well, that's probably been a huge blessing then, to be able to send people to templates. And the interesting thing about templates is, especially on Show It. You know, I mean, we're big fans of Show It too, and it's just such an easy platform to use and sort of pick up and be able to do it yourself. And especially if you start with a good template, you can really make that template your own, I think. I mean,
totally.
So at the end of the day, you don't have to worry necessarily about having a matching website to somebody else, because I think that most of the time when we look at how people have used our templates, they end up with very different websites at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a huge benefit. And I think like the narrative, at least that I was hearing years ago and that I still hear all the time now, is like, I have this website that someone built for me and I don't know how to change it. And so it's been the same thing for the last 6 years. I don't know how to add new photos. My portfolio is super out of date. And I paid all this money for a site that I can't use myself. And I feel like that we've been so pleased to be able to say like, hey, guess what? Like, you don't have to be held in website jail. You should be in control of your own website. And so even now with my clients that I build stuff for, I love that like Jenna Kutcher is like, hey Jen, I just added this page, the sales page the other day. Will you take a look at it? And I'm like, that is so cool that she didn't need to say like, Jen, can you do this for me? She took all the bones that we've created together and she was able to create a totally, matching new section without feeling like she was, held hostage by my design.
So going back a little bit, you had mentioned that you had to learn how to say no. And I feel like that's such a struggle for people is, they have this influx of work and you want to say yes to everything, one, because you're making money from it, but then also because you might not like to say no. Right. So how did you learn, how did you get in that rhythm of saying, okay, these are the projects that I'm going to focus on and that I'm going to say yes to, and these are the projects that I'm going to say no to, at least in the time being?
I will let you know that in 2019, when I've achieved success
when we do another interview in 2019.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever I've solved this problem. So I think that one of the things first you have to realize is that you're not the best fit for every client. And I think that's something that we have to realize as creatives, where we can see ourselves in so many shoes to our detriment. And I go like, I could be the one to do this for you. And these days I have a lot of people that are like, I know that you were put on this earth to design this website for me. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Because there are tons of other really talented designers out there that need a client. And so if I take on too many clients, why am I taking someone who might be a great fit for this person over here? Or why am I taking away an experience that this client might have so much better with another designer who's a better fit for them? So I think that shift in mindset is really important. Just realizing like, you're not the best fit for everyone and everyone is not the best fit for you.
I think that's great insight. I mean, I think we see that we saw that in our photography business as well.
Totally.
We might have a really high wedding, a really high budget wedding inquiry that comes in, and we kind of want to say, this wedding's going to be gorgeous, but at the end of the day, there might be a few things where it's just not a good fit for us in particular. So I think learning to say no, I mean, it's difficult, but I do think it's very liberating at the end of the day. And it really allows you to focus on those clients that are a good fit, that are going to have
Right.
the best experience possible.
Yeah, and so I think that it's realizing like who do you love to create for? Who do you love to create for? How much can you create? And that's something for me that's been huge is realizing like I honestly can't take on too many projects before my work really suffers and before my client experience really suffers. And so my threshold for that is probably lower than a lot of people because I put so much into each project, into anything. And so I think that that's realized like, okay, who do I love to create for? How much can I create? Those are two kind of guiding thoughts. And then when people inquire, it's also really telling like the things that they ask when they inquire, the things that they're attracted to. And I mean, I don't have like a specific design style. I don't have like, oh, this is the kind of site I like to design over and over. And so you need to like this style because I really try to just to disappear as much as I can into each project. What I do love is having each one of those projects be super unique. And so if someone emails me and say, hey, I want something just like this project that you designed over here, to me, that's usually a good tell that I'm not going to be a great fit for the project because I don't want to just redo that website. I want to do something. I want someone to say, man, I keep looking out there. I haven't found anything that falls in line with what I'm looking for. Can you help me create something that's super new and original? And I think that to me is like a super tantalizing opportunity of like, yes, like let's create something super new and awesome.
And we're going to, I'm looking forward to, I want to get to how you do that.
Yeah.
But do you feel like, since we're talking about saying no and picking the right clients and things like that, do you think it's maybe even more important for a designer to have, to pick the right client? Because I almost feel like it's building a house. And
Totally.
it's a little bit more intricate than I think people realize coming into the experience. Like you had mentioned, joking around about people coming and say, hey, I need to launch my website next week, and you're like, yeah, that's just not going to happen, and it's not going to happen at least and it looked good, so there's more intricacies to it. There's some delays, there's decision making on the part of the client. So how do you communicate that kind of stuff to your client?
Communicate them like what the reasons are for them not being able to be, how do I communicate when they're not a good fit? Is that what you're saying?
No. So how do you communicate up front, like what this process looks like? Because it is such, I think, a in-depth process.
Yeah, so I feel like setting expectations in any project is so vital. And I'm just a quick aside here. I think that one of the things that I like to talk about as a designer is kind of figuring out the best case scenario process for you. And so one of the things that I've realized in my workflow is that when a project stretches out and stretches out and stretches out, it causes like as the timeline goes on, there's an automatic like decrease in inspiration and motivation for me both and then also for the client. I feel like you get excited about something and then as the time goes on you get less and less excited all the time and you kind of can't capture it's like dating, like that initial first date when sparks are flying. It's like this is the really exciting time, and then obviously in best case scenario that spark doesn't go away, but in design work I realized that I needed to kind of be able to act on that initial spark, and so I reoriented my workflow to be a design intensive focus. And so I actually did one yesterday with a client. And so we were sitting in a very collaborative atmosphere like you and I are right now. And I was showing her concepts and she was saying like, oh yeah, I like this, but something about this doesn't feel right. And so in that moment, there was a huge amount of energy where I was super inspired. Now, if I wait another 4 months, that energy would dissipate, significantly. But if I work on her stuff today, whenever I'm coming off that like creative high, I'm still in it. Yeah. And so I think it's really important to realize as a creative, like, how do you work well? If you're like, I feel like Krista is this way. I don't know this about her, but she seems like a super disciplined creative where she's like, I'm going to work on this project today. I'm going to sit here for 12 hours and knock out all these things. That's not my skill set at all. I need it's the journalist in me, honestly. It's the writer. Like, I need that inspiration high. And so I've reoriented my process to basically figure out that out. So I communicate that to my clients now, like, hey, we're going to do all your homework first, and then we're going to have a design intensive where we work together and kind of get into the zone together and come out going, okay, like this is our game plan. And then after that, then we can set our timeline moving forward. So, it's been super helpful. It's been a great change both for me and for my clients.
So if you go back in time, and this is the last question I'll ask about you starting your business, because I really want to talk about, how you stay inspired and how others can, come up with an authentic and unique brand. But if you go back in time, what's one thing that you wish you had done sooner in your business?
That what I just told you.
Sure.
I really wish that because the first few projects I did that kind of went long and we were both frustrated and the client's like, hey, what's happening? And I'm like, hey, it's just not there yet. All of that I think could have been saved by taking a hard look at my client experience, my workflow, and going, okay, how can I make this workflow work for me and work for my clients much better? And I thrive in a collaborative environment. I love like chatting with you. I'll be like, super up for the next few hours because I love like interacting with people. And so realizing that I'm not meant to be like in a basement by myself coming up with the design concepts, that's just not how I work well. So I think through how do you work best? Like what leaves you in a like really creative space, and then figure out a way to make that your process. And I think most creatives don't even think about that. They go like, this is how you do this thing, and I've got to do it this way that this other person told me how to do it. That's not true. Like this is the great thing about being an entrepreneur. You are able to create and cultivate your own work environment. So do that, be present in that work environment and figure out how you work well and then do that. So I wish I had done that earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a super helpful exercise just to look, maybe even at the end of every year, to look at different pain points for not only your clients, but also yourself. Because we find with our clients that when we're focusing on those pain points, those things that we keep saying about our clients, man, I wish they wouldn't do this,
Yes.
And I can think of a ton of examples in, especially, in photography or in photography business, just things that I really wish they wouldn't ask for this photo. It's not going to look good. But, as we think through those things, all those things can be solved with a little bit of education. But I love your insight because I think the same could be true for yourself in your own business. Thinking through this doesn't work for me. How can I change it?
Or like my clients hate this every time. Like my clients always struggled early on with creating content because I'd be like, I need all your content for your website because I heard this is what you're supposed to do as a designer. I need all your content for your website before we can get started. And so literally every project would stall out at that point. I think this is true of all designers. I just don't think they say it. But I think every project would stall out because guess what? I'm working for very visual people. And so they sat down with a blinking cursor and were like, no, I have no idea what to create because I haven't seen anything. And so now we develop like the first set of concepts so they kind of know what kind of content they need to create and where it's going to be and where it's going to live. Then they go through creating their content. And as soon as I switched that roadblock disappeared. And so instead of just being like, no, here's this box, please fit into this little box I made for you that says graphic designer, I think it was really helpful just to take a continually evaluative look at the process and what was working and what wasn't working.
Yeah, and we could, I keep on sidetracking myself with also, other stuff. We had an interesting interview with Ashlyn Carter, which will also be, published at some point about, creating content and fitting stuff in that little box. But anyways, we're going to move on because... Hey friends, we're going to take a quick 60-second break so I can introduce you to one of my favorite companies and the sponsor of this episode, Showit. Showit is a drag-and-drop website building platform created especially for photographers and creative entrepreneurs. It's used by some of the biggest names in the creative industry, from Amy and Jordan Demos to Caitlin James, and it's what we built our website on too. What's awesome about Showit is that it's both powerful and easy to use. The intuitively designed website builder makes it easy to change colors, fonts, images, and objects. Finally, a website you can update on your own without having to hire a designer for every tiny change. It's Google friendly, and you can design the desktop and mobile versions of your website side by side to ensure your website looks great on any device. And you can even integrate a WordPress blog with your Showit website, making it that much more powerful. And guess what? They have tons of free and premium professionally designed website templates to help you get started. But what makes Showit such a special company is their customer support. They're super responsive and are there to help every step of the way. You can even save 10% on an annual subscription by using the code BTB show. For more information, check out the show notes. And now back to our episode. We're going to move on because I do want to talk about really this question. You've designed brands for, like you said, you publish a brand and you get all sorts of influx of inquiries, and you've built websites and brands for Jenna Kutcher and Caitlin James and most recently Shayna Skidmore. And I imagine that after you publish those websites, and at least, this is even an observation that we can make, that all of a sudden other websites pop up that may resemble those websites, right? To put it mildly. So, good, yeah. and I guess on one hand, people love your work, and so obviously, imitation is a form of flattery, but at the same time, going out and copying somebody else's website because they like somebody else's website is not going to be authentic or unique for them.
Right.
So you can't work with everybody as much as you might, want to work with everybody, or everybody, a bunch of people might want to work with you. So what would you say to clients who are trying to build an authentic and unique brand, but maybe they're not ready to hire a designer? I think that's an important thing to put out there.
Yeah, totally.
I'm a believer that you should build your first one or two websites, yourself, give it a shot,
I'm with you. Yeah, totally.
And there's so many resources out there like Show It and Squarespace or whatever it is, So I'm a big believer in that. Or, maybe, there's for whatever reason, they're not in a place to hire a designer. So what steps can they take to build an authentic and unique brand?
Okay, so I love this topic so much, and I do think that this is an issue that we see, and it's not just these bigger names like Jenna and Natalie and Shanna and whoever else. I think it's with everyone, and it's because of the state we live in right now, we have a huge advantage, and then we also have a huge disadvantage. And the advantage is that we're creatives, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we have good ideas, we know what we like. Lots of small business owners would be like, I don't know what my website should look like, I have no idea, and just have a lack of inspiration. We don't have that problem. But what we do have is an inundation with what everyone else is doing. And I think that's because of the community online of creatives. I think it's because of just the internet at large, which is just like a comparison game playground. But like 10 years ago, we would have been familiar with like maybe 2 other websites of our competitors in our local area, right? We would have been like, okay, I can't use this font because this guy across town is using this font, and I can't put like a tree as my main image because this other person has that. And that would have been it. It would have been like, okay, everything else is fair game. But now we literally know what the website looks like of like every other creative in the stratosphere. We know who they rebranded with. We know the strategy behind it. We know when they launched it. And so we're just being constantly inundated with other things in our industry, other competitors who maybe even across the globe. We know exactly what everyone else is doing. And so because of this, I think we're tempted to skip a step, and we're tempted to start with emulation instead of inspiration. We're tempted to say, okay, this is what everyone else is doing. I'm going to pick 5 websites that I like and kind of look at them and decide, like, I think this is close, but it's not quite me. This is kind of cool, but it's not quite me. And then we end up with this hodgepodge of items. And I think it's such a shame because, as I've told people before, like, wouldn't it be a shame if you spent all this work and tears and sweat equity, and then your website ends up representing someone else better than it represents you? That's the opposite of our goal, right? So I think the problem is this emulation, and it's because we're not doing kind of the first step. And Seth Godin has this great quote. It says, "Be the best version of yourself, not the best version of someone else." And I think that's kind of our temptation right now. Is like we're just trying to like refine what someone else has to make it fit us. And I've actually had this happen, fairly recently. It was really interesting, actually, because it just gave me a bird's eye view into a common kind of misconception, because I sent this very gentle email to this lady that had a website that was very similar to one of my clients. And it was enough so that it was like a direct replicate. And I was like, okay, like this is probably a little bit too close. Like FYI, this is something that my client has purchased and spent money on. And so therefore, like it would make us both feel more comfortable if you would change it to be a little bit less of a direct, replicate of her website. And this lady very sweetly was like, actually, no, like I didn't copy her website. I brought up like 4 of the websites you've designed, and I just took pieces of each of them. And so it's really not like her website. It's just like all of them. And I was like,
yeah, that probably didn't make you feel much better about
I was like, if you like,
I haven't copied one website. I've actually copied 4 websites.
But she was like, this isn't copying,
Sure.
And so she was like, well, and I was like, honestly, the best way I can explain this to you is like, if you take 500 words from a few different novels and then are like, here's my new novel, it's still plagiarism.
Sure.
But the problem was not that this lady was like a bad person. The problem was that that's how she thought you began the design process, was like you look at 5 other websites and you go, okay, I like this, I like this, I like this, put it together, boom, new website.
So if you had an opportunity to talk to her before she had got started, and you were, maybe you met her in a coffee shop and just in passing conversation, you knew she was working on a website, you would say, hey, listen, really, you should start here.
Yeah. So I think there's this great quote by this guy named Austin Kleon, and he says, you don't want to look like your heroes, you want to see like your heroes, right? So you don't want to go look like Caitlin James. You don't want to go look like Natalie Frank. You don't want to look like Krista and Davey and Krista. Kristen, Davey. So you want to do there's a book called The Brand Gap, and it says like the things you're supposed to do, a good brand does, is like identify, inform, entertain, and persuade. But then there's a 5th thing, and that is differentiate. Okay, so you should be starting by looking at what these people do, but then differentiating yourself and saying, what about this do I like? Why is this successful? See like your heroes. Why is it successful? But then how can I do it differently? And so all of this leads back to the homework process. And so I am very much a homework background designer. And so that's kind of what we've really enjoyed equipping, like even our tonic sites, we do the same exercises. So one of the first things that we do is we do a brand questionnaire. I do this with all of my custom clients. We do it loosely with tonic as well. And it asks some questions like, okay, what would your brand look like if it was a room? Where would your brand shop? What are things that people associate with your brand right now? And so as you do these questions and as you kind of look at the answers, you end up with things that are original to you, because you're not asking questions about the industry. Your eyes are not on other people, they're back into your brand. And so that's super helpful. That's one thing that we do. Another thing we do is called the brand interview process. And this is like something that I came up with because I'm, a former journalist. But that basically entails like you answer a set of questions that are like, what's one thing about my website that I don't think is working well for me? How would I describe my ideal client? You answer a few of those questions, and then you send the same list of questions. I think they're like 4. You send a few of those questions to other people that you trust, or like your partner, like Krista would answer it. And so as you begin to compile those answers, you see the common themes and the common threads throughout. So armed with this homework, all of a sudden you have this rubric of like, okay, my brand should feel like this. And my option is this. And so I know then how to speak to them. And just a cool example of this, at Show at United, where you guys were, we were talking through this whole brand interview process, and I mentioned the one about, where would your brand shop? And that's one of my favorite questions because it sounds like the most like airheaded, Elle Woods approach to graphic design. But it's actually super telling. And one of the girls came up to me afterwards and she was like, oh my gosh, I realized that all this time I've been trying to be J.Crew. And really my client would shop at Sephora. And she was like, and so I was like, yeah, okay, let's unpack that a little bit. So Sephora, like you walk in, it's super well organized. The people are really helpful. Like everyone's like, hey, what can I help you with? Can I help you find something? It's really editorial, and their website is very like editorial and clean. And she's like, yeah, so like I guess my website needs to be super well organized. And I was like, hey, you know what you could do? You should go back and look at like the Sephora magazines and mailers and stuff and figure out like why are they doing what they're doing. And guess what? Sephora is not another photographer in her area.
Yeah.
Is like a multi-bajillion-dollar company that hires genius graphic designers that make them bajillion dollars. So you can bet that they've really thought this process through. So that's one of the favorite things that we do, even with our tonic sites, is like, okay, if this site needs to appeal to someone who likes J.Crew, let's not look at a bunch of photographers who have websites like J.Crew. Let's look at J.Crew and say, okay, how are they using space and fonts, and what do their stores feel like? Because we want someone who loves J.Crew to feel really at home on this website. So it's crazy to me because as soon as you have this inspiration, you're going to end up with something unique because you can't help but do that. You're not starting with like what this industry, is super common, and that's why we have this like state of homogeny in our industry where you can barely differentiate, all these websites because they're all using the same fonts, the same colors, because they're all looking at each other. And it just doesn't make sense to look at another person.
Yeah,
So.
I think that the best thing you can do to stay inspired is look outside your industry, or at least one of the best things that you can do. I know that Krista does that for design, and that our brand questionnaire has some similar questions, and never would we ask like, hey, list your 5 other favorite photographers, and what you love about their website. That would just be, there's no way you stay inspired that way.
And the funny part is that, I think that, I'm sorry to interrupt, I'll let you ask the question you want to ask. But I think that people go, okay, I'm not going to look at other designer. I'm not going to look at other websites. I won't look at this person's new branding because I don't want to copy. Most people have that in mind to begin with. But then they don't know where to look. And
Sure.
So they're like, well, this is super frustrating because, either they go down the Pinterest rabbit hole and they end up with a bunch of stuff that they think they like that doesn't go together, and they don't know why they like it because they were hungry and so they just pinned a ton of recipes, whatever. Pinterest is both great and terrible.
Same
or they
problem, just too much information to consume.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're just spammed with inspiration. Or they sit there with a blank screen. And they're like, okay, got to hammer out this website design, and they have nothing to start with. And so, yeah, some of our favorite sources of inspiration, like whenever Jeff and I get together to design tonic sites, we've designed tonic sites based on a cool store that we were in. And we're like, man, we love the way this feels. We want a website that feels like this. I was on a plane back from Greece, and I saw this really amazing in-flight magazine, and there was a story in it, and I loved the layout of the story. And so I took all the snapshots on my phone of the story layout. And then when I got home, I designed a website that had a similar feel. And it
that must
wasn't
have
a
been
copy.
the most beautiful in-flight magazine ever. You probably weren't flying Southwest or something like that.
No, actually, I think we were flying super budget. Have you ever flown? What is it? WOW? Have you flown WOW Air?
No, I've heard of it, never flown it.
So it's called WOW because you're constantly saying wow during the flight, wow, water is $12. Wow, the seat doesn't recline. Wow, my tray table is stuck.
Yeah, isn't that a Iceland Air?
Yeah,
part of Iceland Air or something like
I
that?
think so. I'm not really sure. It felt like a scam.
Yeah.
The airline attendants were really good looking, and that I decided was that's their selling point. Is the airline attendants are really good looking, everything else is terrible. But it was cheap. But anyway, their in-flight magazine, super on point. So good to know.
Yeah, I mean, even for things like content marketing, marketing, business, things. When I'm looking for inspiration, I try not to look at what everybody else is doing in their marketing efforts within the industry, because there's all sorts of things going on in other industries that are really cool and that are interesting and innovative. And so I find it's a lot easier then to kind of appropriate those ideas, for our own industry where maybe they haven't been used as much, or maybe they haven't been seen as much, that sort of thing.
Right.
So I love that.
You take an idea and then you go back to the brand gap and say, okay, how do I differentiate this idea now for me? How can I take this and not just plug and play it? How do I take this idea and do a version of it that fits with my brand? But yeah, looking outside our industry, I think is a huge place.
Yeah, Krista loves reading, especially fiction books for inspiration. But again, staying out of industry. So I love that insight. I love how you focus on, not what everybody else is doing in the industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great piece of advice for anybody else. So what else? Is there anything else that people can do as they, create their brand and their website?
To make sure that it's unique?
Yeah, just to make sure that they're not looking towards what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, so I think the next important thing after you kind of figure out the tenets of your brand, like, okay, you've done your brand questionnaire, you've done your brand interview, you have kind of a hold on like those things. I think the next thing is who's your ideal client? Who do you want this brand to appeal to? Because ultimately, if you do a great job articulating your brand online, but you don't target it to your ideal client, you're still not going to get the success that you're looking for in terms of inquiries, in terms of conversion, because you've kind of left out the person. And I think this is a really important thing, and this is a concept that Donald Miller teaches a lot, is that, you're not the hero of your brand, right? Like you aren't you just conveying your personality is not the point. And I think this is where a lot of creatives have been really, not well served because they've just been told, like, if you're yourself online, people are going to fall in love with you and you're going to get booked. And I honestly don't think that's true. I think that you should represent yourself authentically online. But I think if you are the focus of your brand, people are not going to appeal to it because people want to see themselves represented in your work and your brand. They want to know how they're going to fit into your narrative that you're creating. So if you're saying, like, this is who I am, you're leaving out the most important person, and that's the people that you want to serve, right?
I think that's the biggest pitfall for an about page, because the about page, it's about you, somebody's trying to learn more about you, but it's really about your client, and they want to see how they fit into this experience. Totally. So great insight, and Donald Miller, huge fan. I guess his Building a Story Brand is a book that I just read in January. Highly recommend.
But his podcast is also super good.
Haven't listened to his podcast. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, super, super good. He's got one on like the pitfalls of your website, and I think it's really smart. I'm an advocate for like less text on a website. I'm an advocate for making sure that it's not just you. And then you're thinking back, like I was just to expand a little bit, you're thinking of it from a process of like, where would my ideal client feel comfortable? And so, for example, one of my clients, Audrey, is a client in Paris, and she was like, my clients love like high fashion. They love like these luxury brands. And so her website needed to not feel super casual. It needed to feel very editorial and in line with everywhere else these people are spending time online. So that was really indicative of the end project, and the aesthetic that we wanted to create was like, what would appeal to her ideal client, both visually and then in terms of the text, like that informs the tone. You shouldn't necessarily just write in your own voice. Like you should think through like, what is my ideal client looking to read? What are they looking to like be told? You don't want to just like sit down and start talking. So it's a matter of like, you're not being inauthentic. You're not saying like, I'm going to be this different person online, because you never want people to meet you and then be like, oh my gosh, I'm totally surprised you're so different. But you are choosing the bits and pieces. Like even with our tonic brand, Jeff and I always joke that like, we're both kind of huge dorks, and then the tonic brand is really cool. And so I'm okay with that, because when you meet me, I'd rather be much more personable. I don't mind. That's still part of who I am. I'd say you
guys are pretty cool too, though.
Well, thank you. I was just setting you up, just teeing you up for that. You're so cool, Jen. No, but like I'm definitely much more personable, and I think you see that like in my email correspondence with Tonic, etc. But the Tonic brand, we still make it our goal, even in Tonic, is like, we're here because we want to help you look cool. Tonic is not about us being cool. We're saying like, you are too cool to be stuck with a website that isn't as cool as you are. And that's our goal, is like, how can we elevate you? You don't want to work with Tonic just because we seem pretty great. And we know that, like, that's not the goal. So, again, choosing which parts of your personality are the most important to show online, but keeping in mind, like, it's not just about you.
Yeah, I mean, if I tried to be completely myself on my website, every picture of me would be in sweatpants. Right? Like I put on this for this interview, but in general, I'm in sweatpants.
Exactly.
But I love that you transitioned to that and how people receive your website, because usability is a huge aspect of building a website as well. So it's it's great to have awesome aesthetics and to have something visually that reflects you in a brand. But then there's also that next step of figuring out how people are going to work through your website and use your website. And that's, to a certain extent, a whole another beast. So do you have any advice for people thinking through that kind of thing?
Yeah, so if you are launching a new website and you've never had someone who hasn't been through it go through it and try to click things and like see what works and where they get lost, that's a huge part of the process, is going, okay, wait a second, like someone needs to use this, because the average person has never interacted with your website before. And if people get lost, you have failed. And I like to say that you have about, I think you have 0.08 seconds to make a first impression on your website. So if they get there and they have, I call it the Cheesecake Factory menu syndrome, where they don't know what to do and don't know what to do next, you've already lost them. You've lost that lead. And so I am a big fan of like looking at your website and figuring out where are you directing people, especially from your homepage. I see this a lot. There's just this smorgasbord of options, but there's nothing that's like elevated in terms of scale or size or design where you're funneling people through, because you want people to get to your website and click, pretty early on. Yeah. You want them to interact in some way.
And I think intuitively we think, oh, people want access to all the things. They want all of the information. And people don't. I mean, I think about my favorite restaurants generally have the smallest menus.
I'm so with you on that one. And I assume when there are 400 things that there are 2 of them that are probably good and they're hidden in this menu, and I have no idea where they are. But whenever people are confident enough to only give me a couple of options, I'm like, they must feel really good about these options. And I love that. Like, I love recommendations. That's like one of my favorite things. So I love when it's like someone says like, this is my favorite thing, because I have the confidence of like, this is going to be good. So I think the same thing approach is true of the approach to website design. Like, you want people to immediately feel confident about where they should go. And I love like layering content in, but you want that process to be very intuitive, where people are going, oh yes, I do want more. Mm-hmm. Oh yes, I will read more of this. And they're making choices that have basically been predetermined.
Yeah, just meeting people where they're at, in their thought process, and as they're exploring your site and thinking about what they want from you. So is there anything else?
In terms of UX?
Oh, or just in terms of building an authentic and unique brand?
Yeah, I mean, I would just one of my favorite things to say about this issue is like, when you start with intention, you create with purpose. Mm-hmm. And all of this goes back to intentionality. When you do your homework, when you refuse to just like survey the creative landscape, when you think about your UX experience as you're designing your site, thinking about like, what do I want people to do? Where do I want them to go? All of that is just intentionality. And what that takes is time. It takes thought and it takes time. And I think creatives, we're very into like immediate gratification, and we have this need to make sure that we're being very well represented online, which is very good that we think that way. But I think it's really important not to skip a step, and lose the intentionality. And so, I mean, part of that, you guys have this with your Palm Shop. I mean, we have that with Tonic, where we've tried to take a lot of the guesswork out of that process. So we've kind of done a lot of the intentionality for our clients and said like, okay, this is how a good flow works. And so, if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I need some inspiration, like, how should my website work? Feel free to just go and look at the sites that we've designed and click through them and see kind of how we've chosen to build an experience. I think that can be really helpful, is just seeing like how designers do what they do. And then take that and, and use that as, okay, this is in my arsenal now to know like how a website should flow. I think it's so vital to just have an intentionality approach to the design process just holistically.
Yeah, and I think we live in a world now where there's no excuse not to have a pretty good looking website, because you have template shops like Tonic, and you have website building platforms like Showit that really do take the guesswork out of, you don't need to know code to get on Showit and work through that. Exactly. And it's gonna take a little bit of learning if you've never been in it before, but it's worth it, because it's a flexible enough platform to do the things that you want to do on it.
And we love it because like we'll get people that are like, man, I thought I needed a custom website, and I feel like this website you guys designed is like exactly built for me. And that's like been most of the rewarding things. It's like people have said, they felt like the products that we designed were custom built for their brand. And I think that's because we do have such a person in mind for each of our products, and we have such a brand that we've created for each one, that we know like this, all of our sites are based on cocktails, which you may know, but we know like this is what the vodka soda would look like this, and would be this kind of brand. It would have ideal clients like this. And so we've really tried to take that approach. And I think it's been cool just to see like who matches up with what, and who really goes like, this is totally me. Awesome.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of value in even starting with a template or building your own website, and going through that process and thinking about these things, because I think when you do that, you're the first, 2, maybe even 3 websites, when you're ready for custom design, you're going to be that much more coherent to your designer.
Totally.
You're going to be able to say, hey, listen, this is what's worked for me in the past. This is what hasn't. I thought this was, kind of my brand, but I feel like it's more this. And so I think it just makes it easier for your designer too, when you get to having a custom brand and website. All right. So when do you think people are ready for custom branding and web design?
Well, I definitely think it's later than most people think, because I get a lot of very well-meaning inquiries that are like, okay, I just started a business and I want to start out right. I want to make sure I have my brand and my website on point. And so I'm ready to like invest and really get that done. And it's fascinating because we're in this creative space, we all know that's what we need, and which is awesome. That makes my job easy because like I said, I'm never having to convince people, wow, you really need a great brand and a great website. So job security is like on point. It's just fine. But generally I'm like, no, don't do this right now. You need to live in your brand. You need to occupy your brand first. Because I like to say a designer can't give you a brand. They can only give your brand something to wear. I am not in the process of just like handing out brands that are going to make you successful. And I think people see these pieces of the puzzle a lot of times because I've worked with some of these influential people like Caitlin and Justin and Mary and Amy and Jordan. And they say, okay, they have a great brand and that's what's made them successful. However, if you look at all these people, 201, they've all had websites for years and years and years before they had ever worked with me. And in that process, they were gaining such a great understanding of what worked for them. Amy and Jordan had built their own website. Caitlin had built her own website. Justin and Mary had their own website. All of these people had websites for a long time. And do you know what they were doing? They were churning out great work in that period of time. They were doing great work. They were working with their clients. They were honing their client experience. And so in the end, when they came to me, they had this arsenal of everything that I needed to just knock it out of the park and say, okay, this is who we are. This is what our clients love. When we did the brand interview for Amy and Jordan, everyone said the word joyful over and over and over in the brand interview process. And we're like, okay, dang, like I guess their brand needs to be really joyful. And so that impacted like the photos that we took of them. They shouldn't be like staring sensitively into the camera. They were like laughing at each other because they needed to be joyful. The copy that they wrote was very welcoming, was very enthusiastic, and they would not have known that, their first year of business, right? And so we wouldn't have been able to make those decisions had they come to me when they first started out. So I definitely think it's really important, and like you said earlier, I think people should build, especially since we have the tools now, since we have awesome site shops and Squarespace, etc. Go ahead and put something up. Just keep it simple. Don't stress about it. Don't worry about it not being overly branded. Just make sure it looks nice and clean and highlights your work well. Those are the earmarks for success for your first website. It should not detract from your work, and you don't want to commit to anything that you're going to like regret in a year. So don't like put purple butterflies all over it because then you're going to be the purple butterfly girl. And then when you change your website, you don't want to be
the purple butterfly girl.
No. Just in life in general, you never want to be the purple butterfly girl. But I think that's where we see people in kind of the cycle of rebranding over and over and over. And we all have that friend, right? Where you're like, you just launched this website, what's going on? And it's because they jumped into something and were like, this is what I need. And then I get these inquiries all the time where people are like, hey, I just worked with a designer 6 months ago, but the end product just doesn't really feel right. Can you rebrand for me? Because I think it's important. And I'm like, no, don't do this. You're skipping the homework steps basically, and you haven't lived in brand long enough. I think Caitlin James had her own brand and her own website for like 7 years before we worked together.
And that's a long time, you know, and branding and web design, it costs money, you know? And so it's just I mean, you could take that money, and, you know, it can help you figure out what your brand and website should look like before ever getting to hiring a designer, and spending a ton of money on something that's going to change 6 months or a year later.
Our tonic designs are like 1/8 to 10th of the price that most of my custom clients invest. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy because I will tell someone who's just started the photography business that it's inquired with me. I'm like, well, my average client usually invests this, and it's a high amount. And they're like, sure, that's fine. And my husband gets mad at me because I'm like, no, do not put this on a credit card. Like, go out there and buy a beautiful template design for like under $1,000 or around $1,000 and enjoy that. It's going to make your work look great. You don't need me yet. You don't need me. And in fact, I would probably be a disservice because I would be branding your business now before it's ever had a chance to grow into what it could be in another couple of years.
So I have to ask this question as we wrap up here, because I see this debate every other week in a Facebook group somewhere with a bunch of photographers wondering, should they put their prices on their website?
So I want to know what everyone else answers this question, because I feel like you're going to get different answers from all the different designers. Yep. So I definitely tend to think that, especially if you are at a higher price point, it's wise to say what your average client invests, because all that it basically does is it keeps you from answering a lot of other emails that are just like tire kicking emails that are like, hey, how much do you charge? How much do you charge? So I think that I don't think it's going to hurt you basically to list that amount and have people inquire for more info. Because if people really fall in love with your work, they're probably still going to email you, even if your website says, I start at $6,000. Mm-hmm. They're going to say like, man, I love your work. Is there any way we can work together? And you'll still have the opportunity to evaluate. If you are just building your business and you are in a place where you're turning away clients, then I think maybe you don't list your price on your website, and you do accept those inquiries, and then you send them pricing guides and give them the ability to fall in love with your work first, and then be kind of equipping them with the pricing information. So I think it kind of depends on where you are in your business, but in general, I'm in favor of it.
Yeah, and we have an article on our blog about this question. We answer it, I think, in pretty much the exact same way. We list our average, our average client spends, and it is, so that people have an understanding of what they can expect to spend. But on our website, and we focus more on the experience, because if people need to know collections, we don't ever really advocate listing collections and things like that and deliverables, on your website. Totally. That's great that we're on the same page with
I'm
that.
So glad. I thought you were going to just be like, nope, disagree.
Yes. Cutting this out of the interview. No.
So off the podcast.
Where can people follow along? And I know we Jen is kind enough to give away some, I guess, the brand questionnaire and the brand interview process, right? You can download those, and we'll include links to that in the show notes. So check that out, especially if you're going to go through a website redesign or brand redesign in the near future. But where can people
even if you're not, honestly, I mean, not to interrupt you, but even if you're not, I think it's really helpful, no matter where you are in your process, to kind of knowing those answers about your brand, your clients, like what other people, how they perceive it. So, don't feel like you have to be going through a redesign for it to be useful.
Yeah, and we'll include that in the show notes. So if you're wanting to download those, go to the show notes. There'll be a link there where you can download that. But where can people follow along with you?
Yeah, so you can find my personal, the Tonic Site Shop, where Jeff and I run that. That's over at tonicsiteshop.com. So we'll have a mixture of website design and cocktail recipes, basically, at Tonic Site Shop. You can find us on Instagram at Tonic Site Shop, and then you can find me personally, which currently is mostly photos of my very handsome husband and children, occasionally with things that inspire me, at Jen Olmstead on Instagram.
And it is a great looking family, and you always have great recommendations. On Tonic, we'll find the cocktail recipes and all that, but even on your personal Instagram. And I want people to know that when I need a good show to watch or book to read or something like that, Jen is one of the people that I go to, and I feel like we share some similar tastes when it comes to TV and movies and things like that.
I think we do. I feel like I can now count on the fact. However, do you like The Walking Dead?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't huge. Just the first couple seasons of Walking Dead, and then I lost interest.
Okay, then we can still be friends because maybe it's Tyler Harrington that still likes Walking Dead.
Because
I feel like that's a rubric
it's
now.
Tyler and Michael.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense because that's kind of my rubric now. Because I'm like, if you still like The Walking Dead, we probably aren't on the same page.
Yeah.
Because my husband still watches it, I think, mostly out of like duty because he's committed to this for so long. It's like a relationship.
Yeah.
But all I hear is just like for like an hour. It's like
I just lost interest.
It's
so.
sad. But no, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I feel like that needs to be like an aside for your podcast. Like what are you watching right now, or like what book are you reading? So that's a good little tip for you. Hot take.
So do you have what's your latest recommendation one there?
I recommended you. I love The Marvelous Miss Maisel, and my husband loved it too. I feel like it's Gilmore Girls for people who thought Gilmore Girls was a little too cloying, and it's not embarrassing. Like my husband watched it with me and really enjoyed it. So I would start there. Although I will say that it definitely has some vulgar moments. So if you're looking for like the super family friendly show, I wouldn't necessarily say that. So other than that, it's great.
And Red Oaks. Let's not leave out Red Oaks. That was surprisingly good. Sad that it was only 4 seasons.
I know.
Definitely makes me think I should have lived in the 80s.
You should have.
My generation. I should have been born in a different generation. But anyways, we can go on about this stuff forever. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was super fun. I enjoyed it. I'll see you next time when we can hotly debate other shows and/or pricing, website options, etc.
Yep. All right. Thanks for tuning into the Brands That Book Show. To stay up to date with the latest episodes, make sure you hit the subscribe button.